Right now, I'm challenging myself to see if I can make 128 Regulation H teams that are each different from one another over the course of 128 days. Why 128, you might ask? At the end of the 128 days, we're going to do something special where we battle every team against each other in a single elimination bracket to see which team emerges on top. There will be some competitively strong teams, there will be some gimmick teams, and there will be some probably a good number of goofs and gaffs in there, so if you want to follow through to the end, subscribe so that you can keep up with each day. But without further ado, let's move on to day 59. Alright everybody, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we are doing another theme team, and this time the theme team is for SaltyDKDan's Friendlocks that he does. And in case you don't know, SaltyDKDan, he's a pretty popular YouTuber, and whenever he plays a Pokemon game with his friends, he does this thing called a Friendlocke, where each of the Pokemon in the Nuzlocke playthroughs of the games is controlled by a person, so he doesn't get any actual input on how the game gets played. It's kind of like Dungeons and Dragons in that way, which I have also never played, but I don't think I would be that good at Dungeons and Dragons. But out of the 3 series that he's done, I decided to grab 2 Pokemon that were at the Elite Four, or for Pokemon Violet, at the end of the game. And we've got a team, and this team it's a very niche team, to put it bluntly. I had to do a lot of things in order to make this team work, but it does have its own little niche strategy here. So let's start off by talking about Gerber the Vileplume. And Vileplume is nice because it's like a decently tanky mon, but we also have the Chlorophyll, and as we'll see, we have the 9 tails, which means that we will be setting up the sun to activate our Chlorophyll, so that way we can get double speed, and we have just enough speed investment so that whenever we hit that 180 base speed, we'll be outspeeding most of the things that we want to outspeed. But also, to further our sun usage on the Vileplume, we have the Growth, which will increase our special attack by 2 stages whenever we're in the sun, and also the attack, but the attack really isn't that useful. And we can use that special attack boost in order to make it so that our Giga Drain deals more damage, so that we're recovering more HP, and we also just have a good stab in the Sludge Bomb. And the Life Orb is going to further boost the damage that we're dealing with Vileplume, so hopefully whenever we get 1 growth off with Vileplume in the sun, we can just sweep the opponent team. And we're Terra Water, because water gives us a lot of good resistances. Next up, we have Borat the Grumpig. And Grumpig's main niche in competitive Pokemon right now is that it is only one of 2 Pokemon in the format that can use the move Simple Beam, which will cause the target's ability to become simple, which means that whenever a Pokemon has Simple, the stat changes that it makes to itself will be doubled. So we can use that for ourselves by clicking Simple Beam into Vileplume in order to make it so that whenever we use the Growth in Sun, we're getting a +4 boost on our special attack. And also a good number of Pokemon on this team also benefit from being Simple Beamed. But we can also use it into the opponent in order to just get rid of their ability if we don't expect that they have any setup moves for themselves. And in case they do have setup moves for themselves, we also have the option for the skill swap. And even though Thick Fat is a pretty useful ability, we do have to be careful who we're skill swapping, since we do want to be using a Fire Ninetales on this team, that if we skill swap the wrong Pokemon with Thick Fat, it means that they get a resistance to the Heat Wave. But skill swap for further ability disruption can be very nice. And lastly, I just decided to use the Nightshade on the Grumpig, so that way we could put all the rest of our stats into HP and speed, because Grumpig is actually pretty speedy, which is not something that I had previously realized when we put all the speed in the Grumpig. It's only like 4 speed points slower than like the fastest Goldango. And as I mentioned before, we have the Thick Fat, which will give us a functional fire and ice type resistance on Borat, which is good because those were both previously neutral. And we also have the Terra type of Grass in order to make it so that we're not getting put to sleep on Borat. So when we become weak to Grass, we won't technically be weak to fire and ice. They'll just be back to being neutral against our Terra Grass typing. And we have the Focus Sash just so we can always take 1 hit, and the Focus Sash is mostly here just so we can always skill swap away the Unaware on Dondozo and maybe mess with it a little bit more. Up next we have Pasty the Ninetales, and Pasty the Ninetales is definitely the one mostly holding up this team here, as we are the Sunsetter on this team. And I decided to make this Ninetales mostly supportive. Like, we do have the Heat Wave for dealing damage, because obviously we want to be dealing fire type damage in the sun, but I also put on both the Encore and the Disable in order to catch people off guard, and we can use both of those tools in order to better get up the other strategies that we have on this team. Like, if a Pokemon protects in front of Ninetales, then next turn we can just Encore them into the Protect. Or if they're using a move against us that we really don't want it to hit us, we can double protect with both of our mons, and then we can go for the disable. And we're in Covert Cloak, mostly so that we're not getting faked out on the Ninetales, and we also have Terra Dragon, just because Dragon gives us a lot of good resistances to things that we were previously weak to. Next up, we got Sarah the Skunk Tank, and Skunk Tank is really not an optimized Pokemon for this format. I mean, there's really not much that Skunk Tank can do to stand out. However, we do have the Stench ability, which adds a 10% chance to flinch to all of our moves, and we're Choice Scarf so that we can be super speedy to hopefully take advantage of that. And we do hit a fast enough speed tier so that we can be faster than Dragapult, the current, technically not actually the fastest Pokemon in the format, but Electrode is not real. So we're going to be using Snarl so that we can get the spread damage to get the 2 10% chances, which can throw a wrench into the opponent, but also the special attack drops are kind of nice for some of our more bulky Pokemon. We also have the Sludge Bomb just for good stab poison damage, and the Dark Pulse for good stab dark type damage, and Dark Pulse also has a 20% chance to flinch, so it's a 20% chance and on multiplied by like a 10% chance, which I'm not exactly sure what that works out to, but I mean it's like a pretty decent chance to flinch. And lastly, I decided to include Haze just in case we need a nuclear option against some setup Pokemon. We can just bring in the Skunk Tank in order to click Haze to get rid of the opponent's stat boost. And we're also Terra Bug just because the only thing that we were previously weak to is ground, and Bug resists ground. Next up, we got Brady the Tauros, and if I'm being honest, Brady's move pool isn't that optimized. Like, I think I was going a little bit too far away from the synergies that can rely on this team by going Terra Ground, Terra Blast. Like, it is nice having our stab 90 base power fighting type move Raging Bull in order to hit the opponent, so we don't have to be running something like close combat that would lower our defense and our special defense. And the Lash Out is kind of nice because if a opposing Pokemon comes in, it's like a psychic type, it means that we can hit them for some super effective damage. But I don't know what I would do with the rest of this Tauros's moveset in order to improve it. Probably just put on like Rock Slide or something like that, but we're mostly just having Tauros here to do Tauros things, as we are an Intimidate Pokemon, so we can get attack drops onto the opponent. And we are Clear Amulet ourselves, so that we're also not getting attack dropped back. And last but not least, we have Deshef, the Dunsparce. And what this Dunsparce is designed to do is to use both Calm Mind and Coil in order to get stat boost, and we can side simple into the Dunsparce in order to get rid of its Rattled ability, which Rattled only comes up if we're getting intimidated, which may or may not happen. I mean, it's not super great, but we don't really have a use for Serene Grace or Runaway on the Dunsparce. So hopefully we can side simple beam into Dunsparce, and then we're getting 6 stat changes per turn with Coil, and 4 stat changes per turn with the Calm Mind, but the Calm Mind's going to be boosting our special attack, which will also boost the damage that the stored power does more directly, as once we click the stored power with a bunch of stat boosts on the Dunsparce, it's just going to Oka whatever it hits. We also have Substitute just in case the opponent needs to take a turn to like protect Trick Room in front of the Dunsparce. We can pretty safely like side simple beam and then get a Substitute up with the Dunsparce and then start clicking Calm Mind or Coil depending on what the situation calls for. The Leftovers is also going to make it so that we can increase our longevity with Dunsparce on the field. And I decided to go Terra Dark on Dunsparce, but I definitely think a better Terra here is just Terra Ghost. But yeah, that's the basic gist of this team. Let's get into some battles. Alright, so first up here, it looks like we got a bit of a Trick Room team, but they do have the Golduck, which is probably Cloud9, which can directly keep us from doing sun things with Ninetales. So I decided to lead Skunk Tank and Vileplume here so that we can maybe get Vileplume started set up, but also the Skunk Tank pressuring with the Snarl here, or just pressuring the Indeedee in general into maybe not clicking the Protect Trick Room this turn is good. And they do immediately swap out to Golduck, perhaps expecting us to swap into the Ninetales for the Vileplume, and we just get off a normal +1 growth here as they Earth Power into Skunk Tank, but Skunk Tank takes it because of the special attack drop, and they decide to Terra Ghost Ursaluna here, perhaps to live an expected Giga Drain, and they do live it, so the Terra was worth it there. As they Hyper Voice both Mons, but the special attack is pretty low, so it doesn't do too much damage to the Vileplume. Now we get Ninetales in for pretty much free as they swap out the Golduck and Ursaluna here for a double switch, but we just get some free good Giga Giga Drain damage. And now we get to see what their Backmon was in the Amoonguss. And they immediately swap into Golduck, perhaps not to take the Heat Wave too hard, but we do get the Heat Wave off, and we get to Giga Drain and DD, so we don't have to worry about the Trick Room going up this time. Golduck might actually have Trick Room now that I think about it, but that wasn't something that I was thinking about at the time. As we watch the Golduck protect here, as we protect with our own Ninetales, and they try sporing into Ninetales, so not a real turn that moves anywhere, but now we get to disable the Amoonguss for going for sleep, and they yawn with Golduck, but we just get to take out the Golduck with our Giga Drain, and the opponent decides to forfeit off of that turn, where since at this point they just have a 15% health Terra Ghost Ursa Luna in the background, so we can just afford to Heat Wave with the Ninetales, and that would pretty much wrap up the game. Here we have a bit of a Sand team, but they also have Clefairy redirection for the Primarina. So I wasn't quite sure how they were going to lead, but they decided to full-on lead Tyranitar and Clefairy here, which is good for our Vileplume, because the Vileplume really does not want to see Corviknight or Incineroar pretty much, but likes everything else other than those two. So that's also why I led Tauros here, because Tauros could deal with the Incineroar, maybe not the Ninetales, but we immediately turn their Sand into Sun as we get off the growth here, but they don't redirect for Tyranitar, which kind of means that I wish I went for the Giga Drain into Tyranitar, as they get the Thunder Wave into Ninetales, which is a little annoying, and they full and go for Icy Wind with Clefairy, and we at least don't get speed dropped on Ninetales, but I figure they're going to swap their Sand out, so I bring the Tauros back in, and we get to Sludge Bomb, take down the Clefairy here, and they get their Rock Slide with Tyranitar, but it doesn't do too much damage. And now they bring in Corviknight here, and we Raging Bull the Corviknight for a good amount of damage, and we get to Giga Drain Tyranitar in order to completely take it out. So now we have the weather control at least for the rest of the game. Brave Bird is going to take out the Vileplume here, so I kind of wish I had Terra Watered Vileplume, maybe in order to keep it in the game, as their Pokemon in the back is Excadrill, who would have been really nice to get a Giga Drain into to try and hit it. But they immediately Terra Flying their own Excadrills. I Terra Ground my Tauros because I don't want to take the super effective Brave Bird on Tauros. However, I think this is also the wrong play, as if I had Terra Dragoned the Ninetales and then gone for the Heat Wave and then just taken the recoil damage with Tauros after doing damage with Tauros, I think we would be in a much better spot here. But Tauros lives, and now we get to get Skuntank in the back, and we Dark Pulse down the Corviknight as they high horsepower into the Skuntank, which takes out Skuntank in one hit. And I also didn't mention this at the time, but the fact that they're faster than Tauros right now means that they are Choice Scarf Excadrill, which also changed things a little bit, but not really, just because I just wasn't playing well. The higher horsepower crit doesn't matter there either, so I think I definitely made some plays in this game that were wrong, where I should have used the Terra a little bit better. Here we have a team that was made by Wolf Glick recently that he entered in a tournament and got top 5 in the tournament. That is a Perish Trap, Skill Swap, No Guard, Sheer Cold team. And I mean, this is just some rando on the ladder playing it. But I figure I'm going to lead Ninetales and Grumpig, since Grumpig's skill swap means that we can stop a lot of the strategy, where we can skill swap the Gothitelle in order to get rid of its Shadow Tag in case they decide to go for the Perish mode. But we can also skill swap away their No Guard and then have Grumpig switch out if that's an option in order to get rid of their No Guard mode. So the lead of Grumpig and Ninetales is pretty good because we can immediately exert Heat Wave pressure, and they decide to protect Golurk, and we get the Heat Wave into Bronzong as we try to skill swap the Golurk in order to take its No Guard with us, but they just Trick Room, and they skill swap with the Golurk, and they reflect with Golurk, but we skill swap back in the Bronzong, and we take their No Guard, and now they have Thick Fat, so they're not weak to the Heat Wave anymore, but there's not much the Bronzong can do. And this immediately bricks the opponent into just quitting the game. They have no idea what to do at this point. Here we got another Trick Room team, but they have the Alchemy, which means that they can exert a lot of pressure like very quickly with the side Decorate. So we lead Grumpig and Dunsparce here because I started leading Dunsparce more often so that we can get that Dunsparce lead, but they do lead the Flamigo, and the Flamigo is scrappy, so even if we were Terra Ghost here, Terra Ghosting would not be a safe option. But we at least get the Tauros in here, who's going to take the close combat pretty okay as we Nightshade into the Flamigo just to get some chip into it, and they Draining Kiss with the Alchemy, so we're going to protect Tauros here to hopefully not get knocked out, and try to get a free Nightshade, but the opponent had the same idea with the Protect on the Flamigo. And now they bring in the Porygon 2, and I tried Terra Blasting since their special defense was down, and I didn't want to commit the Ground Terra since that wouldn't make any sense. But Tauros gets taken out here, but this allows us to bring back into Dunsparce, and they don't have Flamigo on the field, so we get to do the simple strategy where we get simple to Dunsparce, and they Ice Beam into the Grumpig, but Grumpig is thick fat, so it doesn't care, and we get off a defense boost just in case they swapped in Flamigo on that turn. And Magical Leaf and Ice Beam go into the Dunsparce slot, but now we get up the Substitute in case they set up Trick Room that turn, and they decide to Helping Hand into Porygon 2 as we're just dealing Nightshade damage into Alchemy, and the Helping Hand Ice Beam still just isn't doing that much. As we now get up our Calm Mind boost in order to make us even tankier. And this turn they decide to swap in Flamigo, but we get the Nightshade and the Ice Beam comes out, but we get the stored power into Flamigo, which gives us a lot of momentum there, taking out the fighting type. As they bring in their Ursaluna, and they just protect Ursaluna this turn. And I tried to give them simple so that way it would turn off their Guts, but we also get off a free Coil with the Dunsparce just in case they went for Trick Room, and they do go for the Trick Room option, as the Earthquake does damage to everything on the field, but it doesn't break the Substitute onto Dunsparce, and we just get the stored power into Ursaluna in order to take it out, and the Ice Beam is going to finally break the Substitute, but now they just have the Porygon 2 and the Alchemy on the field, so they pretty much need a crit in order to win the game, and the Dunsparce is slower than the Porygon 2, despite them being a Trick Room team, which probably means that they're not correctly IV'd to be a Trick Room team, but I mean, nonetheless, the Dunsparce being set up in this position, even if they were slower, still not very good for them, and we still have a whole Ninetales that they have to get through. Next we have another sand team, but they have a lot more sand in like both the Excadrill and the Garchomp, and Corviknight of course doesn't take Sand Chip. So they start with Corviknight, Ursaluna, and I'm feeling pretty good because I start with Vileplume and the Corviknight, and the Mirror Armor reflects back the Intimidate, but we're Clear Amulet so we don't intimidate ourselves. And now we get to bring in Ninetales in order to get off our ×2 growth, as the opponent tries to taunt into the Vileplume, and they just go for Hyper Voice, which is probably the best outcome for us here. They protect the Ursaluna as we try Giga Draining into that slot, but we Encore the Corviknight into Taunting, and it tried to attack into Vileplume again, so it just taunts into the useless slot. As now they set the terrain to sand, and we get a little bit of Heat Wave chip into both opponents, but we're still faster than Ursaluna, probably because it's trained for Trick Room, so we get the Giga Drain into the Ursaluna there. And now they swap in Garchomp, as we swap in Tauros to try and get an Intimidate down, but they are Clear Amulet Garchomp. As they Terraflying their Tyranitar to not take Earthquake damage, but Vileplume lives it. And unfortunately, Sand Veil miss onto the Garchomp, which is really unfortunate because we would have done a lot of necessary damage to the Garchomp there. But now we get to bring in Ninetales to change the Sun at least. But at this point, we'd kind of have to catch up to the Garchomp, as the Raging Bull probably would have taken it out this turn, but Earthquake is going to cause Tauros to be taken out, as the Rock Slide comes out from Tyranitar, and we do have Grumpig in the back, who I think was not the bring for this team. Like, it might have been a little bit more useful for us to have the Skunk Tank at this point, because we could go, like, Terra Bug, and then maybe try and flinch the Garchomp into winning the game for us. But because the Garchomp is still alive, unfortunately, it's just going to sweep us pretty much. But I think what might have been an actual better turn on this one turn is to expect that Corviknight is going to swap out into another Pokemon, and then maybe try attacking into Corviknight, or at least Encore the Ursaluna into protecting in order to nullify that slot too. Because if we had made it so that we took out the Ursaluna, it means that we could have swapped out Ninetales and then brought Ninetales back in order to set the Sun back up, and then we would not only not have to worry about the Garchomp Sand Veil, but we would also be faster than the Garchomp flat out. Here we have a bit of a snow team, but they also have Cinderace, who you don't really get to see. I think there was like a Choice Band Cinderace team running around that was popular for reasons I didn't really look into. But they immediately lead Ninetales and Rillaboom, which is great for us because we led up Vileplume and the Skunk Tank. And I just decided to swap in Ninetales here in order to get rid of their Snow. And we get to Sludge Bomb into Ninetales for some great super effective damage. And we get a Poison, which is pretty nice, as they fail to set up the Aurora Veil. And they U-turn out the Rillaboom into the Slowking. And I figure that they probably want to Chilly Reception out, so I just kind of ignore that Pokemon this turn and get some good Sludge Bomb damage and good Heat Wave damage, and we do get a burn on Slowking, which doesn't really change anything, but we do proc the Excalibur's ability to give it an attack boost as they bring Rillaboom back in here with the Chilly Reception. And I just decided to pretty much sack the Dunsparce here, hoping that they decide to attack into Ninetales in order to get rid of it. And they do Scale Shot here, but the Scale Shot isn't enough to take out the Dunsparce, and now they get a Speed Boost and a defense drop, and they knocked off our Choice Scarf on Skuntank, which means that we're a little bit less reliable in our speed control, but they decide to take out the Dunsparce here, and we in turn decide to take out the Excalibur. But now Ninetales is on the field with the possibility of using the Aurora Veil, but we bring in our own Ninetales again to set up the Sun, and that forces them to Blizzard with the Ninetales, and we try to go for the Heat Wave, but we miss the Ninetales unfortunately, and then since we're no longer Choice Scarf, I can Dark Pulse into Slowking to maybe get a flinch. But they get up their Chilly Reception, which means that they can now go for the Aurora Veil with Ninetales. So depending on what the Slowking has, this might kind of turn around for us. But they just decide to go for the Blizzard with both Mons, which I figure is fine because we can just Heat Wave with Ninetales for the super effective hit into both Mons. And they U-turn out with Rillaboom, but they don't decide to pick what Pokemon they're swapping into, as I think they can kind of see the writing on the wall at this point that the game is just over. And lastly, we have a Trick Room team, but they also have, like, Weezing. There's just a lot of pieces on this team that I really don't want to have to deal with. It's like, the Decidueye pretty much just, like, hard stops to Dunsparce is what it feels like. And King Gambit can, like, pretty safely Sucker Punch most things in the endgame other than Tauros, but Tauros will end up giving it an attack boost if it's Defiant, which it usually is. But we lead Skuntank and Vileplume here as they lead the Ursaluna and the Oranguru. And I go for that turn 1 Snarl again, maybe to get a flinch, but the Oranguru can be inner focus, so it doesn't have to worry about flinching, it's just the Ursaluna. But the Ursaluna seems to be Covert Cloak, so it doesn't actually take a Spatak drop here, as they Psychic Noise into Vileplume, so we at least take less damage on that front. But the Heal Block means that we can't Giga Drain the Ursaluna next turn, as the Earth Power is just going to take out the Skuntank, so not a great position for us overall. But I'm at least glad that Oranguru didn't set up the Trick Room, but they're also Mental Herb, so we can't Encore them there, so they could have set up the Trick Room there as well. Blood Moon comes out, and they tried skill swapping into the Vileplume to try and take our Chlorophyll, which maybe reads to me that they're actually not Trick Room. I mean, they probably are Trick Room. It's probably like Psychic Noise, Skill Swap, Instruct, and Trick Room on the Oranguru, which we won't get to see it, but they protect the Ursaluna here as I try Giga Draining once the Heal Block wore off, and we Encore the Oranguru so that is forced to Skill Swap for forever, and we get the Inner Focus as they get our Drought, and I'm just Giga Draining the Oranguru because I thought the Ursaluna would leave, but we Encored it just in case it stayed in to force it to protect until the end of time, and they do steal our Chlorophyll here, but we get the Heat Wave into the Oranguru, and they tried skill swapping into Ursaluna to make a Chlorophyll Ursaluna, but thankfully Ursaluna is forced to protect, so that doesn't work out. And they reveal that they're Supreme Overlord King Gambit, and they immediately Terra Flying too. But we get the Heat Wave into both Mons, and we get the Giga Drain into Ursaluna in order to take it out, but also to put us at full health on the Vileplume. As the Kowtow Cleave comes out into the Ninetales, and that's going to take it out, and that's going to take the Sun out of the game. Not technically, but I Terra Grass with Grumpig here in order to skill swap the King Gambit in order to take away its Fallen Friend boost. And we get to Sludge Bomb into Arboliva, but Arboliva is actually Sash, so it gets to live the turn here as they Kowtow into Grumpig, and they Hyper Voice with Arboliva, which does pretty decent damage to both. But now we're playing an interesting little game where they could, like, Sucker Punch with the King Gambit, and then Arboliva can just Hyper Voice, and that, like, probably ends the game on most cases. However, our Vileplume is faster than the Arboliva, so if they decide to do that, that means that Sucker Punch has to KO, and they no longer have their main damage in the Supreme Overlord, and they're left over, so they're also lacking like a Black Glasses or anything like that to boost their damage. But I think that they read this because they decide to side Helping Hand into King Gambit in order to increase his damage, but we protect with Vileplume, and we just get some nice shade damage into King Gambit here to perhaps stall to see what they wanted to do, but we also get more Grassy Terrain Recovery, and our Grassy Terrain Recovery matters more than theirs, and they do the Helping Hand again, and I skill swap the Supreme Overlord onto the Vileplume in order to increase its damage since we have two Fallen Friends. And Vileplume is holding the Drought, so we get to reactivate the Sun, which reactivating the Sun doesn't really do anything here, but It's just kind of funny that the sun reactivates. So we get the Sludge Bomb into the King Gambit. Actually, us activating the sun here means that if they decided to do something really weird, we could have just growthed for like another ×2 boost if they thought if we thought that they were gonna like Sucker Punch or something like that. That was kind of an off-track tangent, but the turn works out in our favor because we just get to KO King Gambit there, and we can't KO the Arboliva with Nightshade, but there's also really not a better move. But the Sludge Bomb from the Vileplume is just always going to end the game there. So yeah, that was the SaltyDKDan Friendlocke theme team, and it was really difficult to get synergies among all of these Pokemon, as I think especially like in the first 2 regions, like there were some Pokemon that I flat out had to rule out, like Crustle and some other ones that just aren't in the game. So the ones that I was left with to make team synergies with, I'm pretty glad, because I feel like I cooked pretty good on these team synergies. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, maybe consider leaving a like on the video and even consider subscribing, because both of those things would help me out an absolute ton. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you.